Okay, welcome back to Getting Lost with myself, Gooder, and my good friend Dan, who is maybe still lost or maybe less lost.
I'd say I'm a little bit less lost. I mean, we're on to season 2 now, so progress is being made. Mysteries are being revealed. More mysteries are being generated. But finding our way through Lost, I think, is probably where I'd say we are.
Yes, tweak your catchphrase. So start of season 2. So this is Man of Science, Man of Faith.
Yep.
And we're basically picking up pretty much straight after where we left off. Hatch blown open, no clear way down, and away we go.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that was quite useful on watching this one is that I actually had a bit of a break between finishing season 1 and starting to watch this episode. And I think that helped because I think you've got to watch episode 1 with the fact in mind that when it was first aired, you would have had, I don't know, a year's gap, or wouldn't be quite a year, but there would have been
like a normal gap between
seasons. I can't quite place how it's probably 6 months, isn't it? Is going to be the gap usually between the end of a US season and the start of the next one. And I didn't have 6 months, but I probably had a good few weeks or a month between finishing season 1 and watching season 2. And I think that is reflected in the sort of structure of it because it's quite simple in that you left season 1 with a bunch of big things going on. You can probably divide them up into, they've got into the hatch as thing 1, and then you've got all the stuff that happened on the raft as thing 2, with a whole bunch of other side mysteries and bits and pieces going on. And this episode, I think quite sensibly goes, right, we're not going to complicate matters. We're just going to focus on one thing. And you coming back to it, it was like, oh, there's no mention of the guys on the raft whatsoever in this episode. But it was like, oh, they've just decided to focus on the hatch and made it effectively almost a point of view character episode in that the flashback is all about Jack. Jack is the sort of lead protagonist in terms of how they investigate the hatch in this episode. And so as a audience member coming back into it after a 6-month hiatus, I think having that very simple structure, revealing some things to you while adding some extra bits works very well and has clearly been designed that way because of that hiatus. I think if it was just the next episode in an ongoing season, it would probably be structured quite differently.
Yeah, interesting thought. Worth noting that it opens same way as season 1 opened, with the close-up of somebody's eye opening.
Yep.
I can't remember whether it does or not, but I'm going to be intrigued to see if they repeat that for seasons 3, 4, and 5, and 6.
Yeah. And it opens with Lost always has a cold open, but it opens with a cold open of something you haven't seen before as well, which again is kind of a repeat of the season 1. Season 1, it's a cold open of, oh, they're on an island, and you have to kind of figure out this is the context of it. And it does the exact same thing, that it doesn't explicitly tell you what you're seeing, but you sort of gradually get the picture of it. And again, similar to the season 1 pilot, you then suddenly have an explosion and chaos.
That's the first curveball is what you're watching at the start, although you're not necessarily aware of it, although you can probably guess, even if you've not seen it before, that what you're watching is the insides of the hatch.
Yeah.
And obviously that kind of initial curveball is that everything inside the hatch is almost a blend of like 50s and 70s in the hatch.
Yeah, we can probably talk about it in like the details that you sort of pick up, and you get it from that opening scene and a few other points in time later on, but mostly that opening scene. I had it pegged down as everything seemed to be from like the late 70s was where I sort of was placing things. Maybe early 80s, but like that's 70s, 80s was that style of long play records in particular, and some of the like kitchen utilities and things like that all sort of hark back and like, oh yeah, okay, so this is 70s, 80s era stuff. And that's really interesting. I don't know if should we just talk about it now? Because
it kind of sets it up as, because you're primed, like Lost has kind of primed you for things to be flashbacks often.
Yeah.
So you see the kind of older looking environment, so you think it's going to be a flashback to something.
Yeah.
And I think that's the idea, is you kind of think, oh, this is going to be a flashback to not necessarily one of the characters' lives, but like perhaps them as a child growing up or something. And obviously you have that sequence of this character who does turn out to be Desmond, like going about his business. And then, you have, as you mentioned, you have the explosion go off, and then you get the full realization that, oh, this is inside the...
Yeah, the quite nice reveal, and the way they did it with the... because they do it with Desmond looking through the sort of spyglass thing, and then you have a nice camera shot of it sort of going through the tunnels and then up the hatch. And then you reveal the sort of opposite of what you ended the last season of, with them looking down, with the view effectively the opposite way around of looking up back at them. And you go, oh, okay. And then that sort of I'm cutting ahead a lot, but the sort of big thing on the episode is the sort of realization, oh, this is a character the survivors know from the past, or specifically Jack knows from the past. And that just the amount of questions that you sort of, on watching through that first scene again, that you generate is like, okay, so this is really interesting, because all the stuff in there is sort of at least 20 years old. Well, that's sort of what I'm sort of pegging it timeline wise. Yet we know that Desmond clearly hasn't been in there for 20 years, because he's been with Jack. So he's at most he's been there for 5 years or something, if he immediately headed off from that Jack encounter. I can't specifically place how far back in time that Jack Sarah operation thing was supposed to be, because he did have slightly different hair, but it's clearly not. Yeah. It's not 10 years we're talking about here.
I believe that it's the furthest back we've seen Jack.
Yeah, I think that's right. But the sort of questions that immediately came up on the sort of second watching of it and going, okay, well, what can I gather from this was, the facility that he's in clearly predates him being there. But the facility, you've got this big quarantine sign on the hatch on the inside.
Yeah, on the inside of the hatch.
Yeah. And you sort of see him injecting himself with something. And so there's questions about, why is he in there? And it kind of harks back a little bit to my sort of theory. It's like a fallout shelter, but rather than it being nuclear fallout, it's like, is it a sort of trying to stay away from some kind of sickness? And that immediately made me think of, well, if you go back 17 years, that's when Danielle and co were on the island. So that's broadly the sort of timeline you'd be talking about. If this was 20 years or 25 years ago, and Danielle talks about sickness hitting them and so on and so forth, and you kind of think, okay, was this something that was set up 20, 30 years ago because something got unleashed on the island, and Danielle and co turned up? And is that thing still there? Is that still thing not there? And the other big question that sort of they make a thing about is that, well, I think they make a thing about, is that clearly Desmond is on his own as far as we're concerned, but everything in that place suggests that it wasn't built for one person. So like he's sleeping in a bunk bed, then like all the he's seen like multi-person. So why is he on his own? Were there others? Using the term others, that's probably a risky one.
Yeah.
But yeah, the amount of it's such a cool way of doing it, in that they've given you what is a relatively brief scene, but there's so many little details and questions that you sort of generate just from
what is happening. Yeah, and it's the kind of it's switching environments as well, even within the hatch, because like in the very opening bit where Desmond is doing his domestic things, it's almost like a house. It's basically like a house. We even have the artificial, like, sunlight.
Yeah, interestingly, that artificial sunlight bit reminded me of a diner rather than a house. I don't know why, but I think
it's kind of got that diner feel to it. Yeah, but very. But then we move away from that bit and we get some quick glimpses of the kind of computer station at this point, but not a real close look at it. But we do see things like the kind of telescope that's kind of attached to the ceiling, like a strange kind of. So you've already got this kind of mix of feelings from the environment, like it's there to like it's designed to keep people happy long term, but there's also something clearly like almost missile bunkery about it, like military feeling.
Very, very much so. Like and like the reaction that
there's the gun
Desmond has, like as soon as it, when it kicks off, you've got him sort of doing his domesticated stuff, doing his exercise, all of this sort of thing, and then immediately it's like goes to the gun room, gets all the guns, very military, very sort of, again, harping back to my idea of like Fallout bunker or some description. And you kind of wonder who set this up, because again, it doesn't make sense that Desmond was the one who did it because of what we find out there. So, but he's clearly very well motivated, I would say, in that it's not like on encountering someone else, there was, if you've been there for a long period of time, you'd think it'd be, oh my God, someone else, yay!
Yeah.
It's more, right, tool up, get the guns.
Yes, his note, it's notable. His reaction is one of, I have to protect
something, or
myself or something over, oh, somebody's come to rescue me.
Yeah.
And then what we do have kind of at the top of the hatch is we're kind of straight back into this kind of unease between Jack and Locke.
Jack and Locke,
they're still kind of butting heads, but not quite as, they kind of both back off it a little bit, I think, through the episode. And then obviously, Locke commits to going down the hatch. Jack, never was interested in actually going down. He just wanted to use it to protect people, so he can't do that now. But he does, obviously, in the end, he does go back to find out what has happened to Locke and Kane.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting how that relationship between those two's kind of evolved, because I think it's almost become that they've both realised that actually they can do their own thing, which is kind of how the acceptance, how it doesn't degenerate into like a fist fight or anything like that in this case. It's sort of the gentle realization that, well, it might be annoying to Jack that Locke's off investigating his hatch. Grand scheme of things, well, Locke can do Locke stuff and Jack can do his protect the survivor stuff. Yeah, that's the sort of attitude they've sort of adopted, which is, I'm going down the hatch. You can stay if you want.
And they both actually kind of needle each other about this as well, like almost jokingly. Like right towards the end, you have Jack sort of saying, "Oh, is this your destiny? Is this where it all led? Is it as Locke is held by gunpoint?"
Yeah.
So they kind of get their little digs in against each other. We do actually get Hurley telling Jack about the numbers.
Yes, we've got that, which Jack sort of takes. And I think that was one of the, it's really difficult to quite get the character of Jack right in some of these mysterious bits now.
Yeah.
Because I could 100% get that if you're the man of science, all this sort of stuff. If Hurley was just telling you this story, it would seem preposterous and you'd just kind of ignore it. But you're now at the point where, he's not just telling you the story. He's sort of providing enough additional links to what's going on. The fact that it's written on the hatch and all this sort of thing. You kind of think that Jack would be at least a little bit curious, I'd guess, rather than effectively dismissive, which is what he is.
I think it's quite an intriguing reaction, because he doesn't outright kind of say, "Oh, that's nonsense," or completely dismiss it. He just kind of listens, considers for a bit, and then kind of says, "You were in a
mental institution or
institution," and then Hurley's like, "Well, what of it?" And Jack's like,
"Yeah, well, that's the bit I've taken from this conversation."
So it's kind of, I got the sense from it that Jack does accept that something weird is going on there, because I think we've got to a point now where even Jack has seen enough things to start kind of accepting that some of it is actually happening.
And that's it. That's the sort of one bit about the Jack's character that I've not quite managed to place what his thought process is, because he's acknowledged it. Like, there's been a few episodes where he's sort of done that. Have you been on this island for the last 40 something days? Of course, there's weird stuff going on, but it's not. It's also something that he just seems to push down and just kind of ignore, rather than being in any way interested in exploring it, and still attempting to apply pure logic to everything that he comes across. So it's kind of like he's almost struggling to sort of rationalize the weirdness that he's seeing, and therefore kind of just pushing it to one side and focusing on other things.
I think it's kind of this thing where, like, his kind of, or maybe not the whole season, but a lot of the season 1 arc for Jack is he kind of starts out at the very start. He's the one running around, like, kind of saving people. So people kind of elevate him into this leadership position, which he bucks against.
Yeah.
For a while, and then he accepts that in the end, where, like, people are looking to me. So I think at this point, like, his primary thing in his way of thinking is, I'm doing what I can to protect people. So I think he comes across something weird, like the numbers. He kind of listens, takes in, but it's not relevant to his primary, like, kind of right now goal, which is protect people. So I think that's kind of why he kind of listens, takes it in, and then just kind of moves on.
Yeah, and I guess that might be the sort of the doctor in him, that he's sort of dealing with the immediate problem at hand and just compartmentalizing all the other bits, the long-term stuff, just off to one side. And that might be the way it's sort of, you've got to kind of view the character.
Yeah, and it kind of connects in a little bit, I guess, to his flashbacks here, where, like, one of the main things for him character-wise is, in these flashbacks, is kind of learning not just to be brutally truthful with his patients.
Yeah.
And kind of giving them that bit of hope. And then I think the most interesting bit for me, or one of the most interesting bits for me in these flashbacks, is the fact that Sarah does recover when Jack thinks the operation has failed.
Yeah.
She's like, well, why can't I wiggle my toes?
Yeah.
So the question that comes up is, like, why has she recovered? Is that, again, another thing that's kind of connected to weirdness?
Yeah. And I think it's like the way the show did it, it directly mirrors what we've seen with Locke, in that the first thing that Locke discovered was the ability to wiggle his toes. And that's the first thing that Sarah does. So it immediately sort of casts your mind to go, okay, is there some connection to whatever has happened on the island to the characters themselves, or wider things? Because you've got this meeting with Desmond, who later then appears on the island, and Desmond kind of acts almost like the trying to think, kind of in the role that, you'd expect someone like Morgan Freeman to be doing, sort of I'm just going to impart some sort of big wisdom on you in this sort of casual encounter that we have, and then disappear off.
Yeah.
And so, and that's the bit that you get just before the miracle occurs. So it does very much feel like, and because Desmond, you discover, is on the island. Again, it's like, is this all linked? You've got Jack, who ends up on the island. You've got Desmond, who ends up on the island. You've got this whole message that's going on throughout the flashbacks for Jack, which is, don't always think logically, don't always think the man of science. Occasionally you have to be the man of faith, give people that hope, or maybe you've already fixed her, maybe the miracle has happened, and then the miracle does happen. So there's all these sort of links back to, is there either a bigger thing going on, or is it the fact that the people who end up in the island have something linked to them that causes people to walk, or whatever it is?
Yeah, and we also, from what we know, you can kind of wonder whether, in the longer run, this is what leads Jack back to being a bit more just kind of straightforward, because obviously we know he ends up marrying. Definitely one thing that did occur to me during this flashback is, why are all the, and it tends to be husbands or boyfriends rather than girlfriends of secondary characters are always jackasses.
Yes, yeah,
Sarah's fiance here is a jackass. Like Claire's boyfriend was a jackass.
yep.
Shannon's boyfriend that we see was a jackass. The only one who wasn't a jackass was Kate's childhood friend that she got killed.
Yeah, yeah. No, I'd noted that down. But I mean, it was kind of an interesting. Like I get what in this case they kind of had to do it because, well, I guess they could have. I'm just trying to think out. They've had to rewrite the character, but yeah, you know that Jack ends up together with Sarah relatively soon after this instance, and so the fact that she was on her way to prepare for her wedding meant you had to kind of break that up fairly. And I guess the way you did it is by, oh yeah, this guy's a jerk.
But I guess you wonder, but then the question is, well, why write in that she was on her way to a wedding at all? Like, why have it in there at all? You know?
And it's interesting that because, like, I mean, you've kind of spoiled it now, but I always kind of assumed that like you had this arc of Jack getting married to Sarah after he'd sort of saved her life or saved her back after this surgery thing. And I kind of always felt like, okay, well, it makes sense that somewhere down the line they split up because they've clearly got together because of the big extenuating circumstances. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they're naturally compatible towards each other. And one of the sort of telling things about the whichever episode it was where they have the rehearsal dinner is that Sarah's big speech about Jack actually isn't about Jack and why she loves Jack. It's about, oh, Jack fixed me.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's actually not a great motivation to be marrying someone. And so in my head, I always kind of thought, okay, well, it makes sense that they ultimately don't stay together. And that's why Jack's, we presume, single when we see later on. But yeah, okay, so flashbacks wise, what else did I cotton on to? There's obviously the bit with Desmond, and I think that's, he does provide this interesting role of like the sage advice that just comes out of nowhere.
Yeah. And the key bit for the audience to hook on to is his speech pattern of saying brother.
Yeah, which is the sort of clue that provides the reveal, because he does look sufficiently different. Like I didn't like just looking at his face, I wouldn't have been 100% certain it was him. Having that little speech pattern hook worked very well. And he says brother, Jack looks at him, has the recognition, you have the shot of him, and then you go, okay, well, it's this guy. And it's like, creates that cliffhanger quite nicely. There's a few other, like he's got some interesting little bits of dialogue. Because first of all, he sort of mentions that he's off on a race around the world, which may or may not be how he ends up on the island. But there's that interest. What does he mean by a race around the world? Because there's limited ways you can race around the world. You can't run around the world. You can't really drive around the world. So you kind of think that is he flying or is he boating or something along those lines. Either way, it sort of looks like that could be a mechanism to get him onto the island as well.
Something 80 Days Around the World style. Yeah.
He mentioned, like, his final line is "See you in another life," which is, I think, is that a line that's been done before in Lost, or is that just? But it's an interesting line anyway, because you see him in normal Jack life, and then see him in another life. The next time you see him is in this crazy underground bunker on the mysterious island. Yeah. So it very much is.
And I wonder how much they're deliberately playing here with the audience a little bit, because I think something like this will be picked up by people who are like, oh, they're all dead because it's another life.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes, now that we're in season 2, I think obviously the writers kind of knew a lot of the audience theories and things. So I think they kind of play with it a little bit at points.
And he also has the line of "lifted up," which I'm not quite sure what he's referring to, but seemed like a very, it was delivered in such a way that I was like, oh, this is an important line, lifted up. And it does the classic Lost thing of, here is something slightly mysterious, but now I'm going to explain it away to say, oh yeah, I was talking about your ankle.
Yeah.
Even though I'm not quite sure why it's mysterious, lifted up, but Maybe he meant the hatch, I guess. Open the hatch, lift it up. Not sure. Otherwise, I think that the main thing I got from the flashbacks was you sort of already mentioned that he has this sort of lesson about his dad about hope.
Yeah,
and that's quite interesting to see because we've sort of obviously massively criticised his dad for being, loser dad, not very good dad, terrible father figure.
Well, yeah, I guess we kind of reached the point of we can see what his dad was trying to do, but he was just doing really bad.
Yes, that's it. And this is actually seeing him providing good lessons to Jack, and it's interesting that it's in a professional environment, and that sort of fits in a lot with what we know about Jack's dad's character, in that he's not very good at what I'd call the normal parenting things.
Yeah.
But he's clearly very good at sort of what he's good at. And so as a surgeon doctor person, he is actually very good as a mentor father figure in that particular environment. So that was sort of interesting to see. But I think the main thing that you get from it is Jack's huge emotional attachment to the sort of Sarah outcome. In that you've got the whole, I'm going to do what I can. We've had the whole Jack not willing to let things go, keeps going no matter what. And there's a bit of you that sort of sees the bits and how it evolves, where you've got him suddenly saying, "Oh, I'm going to fix you," to her out of the blue, even though he's already admitted that he thinks it's totally hopeless, and all of the operating staff looking at him going, "You're nuts." There's never going to happen. And then he's obviously believes he's failed. He's running the steps and he's trying to sort of burn through it. And then the sort of breakdown when he realizes that the miracle has actually happened and that she can do it.
Yeah, it's that kind of thing of Jack takes the lesson from his dad, possibly overcorrects. Then as we've seen, Jack's not good with dealing with failure, so we get that kind of aspect of him again.
But because it's two stages, isn't it? There's the sort of emotional distress when he's failed and he's having to tell her that, and then the emotional joy of what's happened. And it's an interesting again, it's harping back to this lesson towards Jack of you can't just look at things logically. You've got to have some element of hope, some element of faith in order for things to work. Other than that, I don't think you got much else from the flashbacks. There's a few other little bits on the island that I quite liked. Like there's a really good bit of dialogue between Locke and Jack when Locke basically says, "I'm going off down the hatch," type thing. And Jack basically makes his logical plea to Locke. And I don't think I wrote down exactly what he said, but effectively Locke's like, "Yeah, I get all that. I totally understand that this is completely illogical and I shouldn't do this, and you've got the sensible play, but I'm going to do it anyway."
Yeah, and I think what happens is they talk about it, and then Jack is like, "Oh, we were opening this up so we could get people to safety. Like, we can't get people down to safety quickly." And they kind of briefly talk about rigging up a pulley system or something. And then kind of at the end of the conversation, like he almost kind of shrugs his shoulders. Locke's just like, "Yeah, you're right. I'll come back with you." Yeah. And then they get back to the camp, and then like straight away, like Locke's pulling out cable from somewhere, and it's like, "What are you doing?" It's like, "Well, I'm getting cable. I'm going down the hatch."
Yeah, I think it's the bit I liked about it was just the acknowledgement of the other person's position.
Yeah. I think we kind of said, like, they both kind of get to this point now where they know what each other is about.
Yeah. The other big thing that sort of crops up in the episode, well, I say big thing, it's a relatively short scene, but with Shannon.
Yes, Shannon sees Walt.
Yeah.
Or what we know as far as we know is Walt.
Yeah, so she's off hunting for Vincent, and that first of all, there was a good little bit of like motivation there, and kind of a nice payoff from what Walt did at the end of season 1.
Yeah.
Giving Vincent to Shannon to give her something to grasp hold of. And so you sort of see that payoff in that she's concerned about Vincent. She thinks, this is her thing, that she's going to look after her Vincent. And then you get her seeing this image of Walt. Interestingly, like soaking wet and speaking unintelligibly. I'm not quite sure what he was supposed to be speaking. But it, to me, looked like he'd drowned, which I guess is kind of interesting given that you've had them get abducted on the raft. So you wonder what's going on there.
Yes, because this is effectively our only connection to the raft group at this point.
So that's a sort of interesting thing, because it's not the first time we've seen people having visions of stuff that ultimately comes to pass or has passed.
We also get kind of in the sound mix of this as well as the return of the whispering voices.
Yeah. Because that's sort of that's what you get just before she finds or sees Walt. And she's the only one who sees him, I think, because Saeed rocks up, but after he's disappeared.
Yeah, and I've just checked it. So apparently what Walt says is, "Don't push the button bad," which I think from this episode
I definitely didn't hear that, but okay.
Yeah, it's hard to make out, but apparently that's what he says. And I think given you would connect that, given this episode, to the button that we get a couple of close-ups of that says execute.
Okay, well, that's interesting. Yeah, I'll have to think. If he says don't push the button bad, that's an extra little bit of context to contemplate. Possibly more relevant in future episodes, but we'll see.
I think the other one of the other moments on the island that I like is some other survivors. There's at least one other survivor who has a lie.
I think there's at one point there's like 3 random survivors, 3 female survivors that I've never seen before that just randomly are like talking to Jack or someone. I'm like, who are these? These are some other randos. They're clearly going to get killed off.
Yeah, because I think there's a couple of short scenes where people are like, oh, what's going on?
Yeah.
It's the others.
The other kind of nice bit is the what happens with Kate as well.
Yeah, you do have her repeating back Jack's line of live together, die alone, as she goes off to...
Yeah. And when she turns up and Locke's like, oh yeah, totally knew you were turning up, which is kind of an interesting fact that he's clearly got her pegged a lot better than Jack does, for example. And a couple of sort of interesting bits and pieces. We see the light shining up from the hatch yet again. Always seems to affect Locke, which I'm still not quite sure if that's supposed to be like the mirror system or something else.
Right, yeah.
It's really sort of bright and shiny, and there's a bit of me that wonders if that's supposed to be because it's like when Kate falls down, and we don't see anything that would suggest why this would result in a big huge pillar of light coming out. So there is a bit of me that is, because it's only ever been seen by Locke, I do wonder if maybe there's something Locke related to do that pillar of light rather than reality or practical reasons for that big pillar of light.
I guess we do get a few like odd moments once Jack goes down, because he finds like the pair of shoes that have been, like the pair of boots that have been left in the corridor. Yeah, so this is where
this one we get the Jack.
We get the Jack side of it this time.
Yeah. But yeah, you get an interesting way of telling the story at this point, because you see Kate disappear from Locke's perspective, and then you don't see what Locke then does in terms of following on. Instead, you get the entire perspective continues from Jack's perspective, in that Jack turns up, Kate and Locke are nowhere to be seen.
Yeah,
he lowers himself down and starts seeing various things. The music comes back on, and we don't see what has sparked the music coming back on, which I didn't note down what the song was because I wanted to look it up, which was a song called Make Your Own Kind of Music by Mama Cass Elliot.
Yeah.
which I briefly Googled, but literally all it came up with is, this is made famous by the series Lost. I was like, that's not particularly helpful.
Yeah, I think it was quite a well-known song before that, to be fair.
I assume it was, but yeah, I was like, I clearly can't Google this anymore because I'm just going to hit some kind of spoilers at this point.
Yeah, so you get like a few strange things, like once Jack goes down because Jack decides he's going to go see what's happening for Kate and Locke, finds nobody there, decides to go in after them. So he gets there's like a few things. So he comes across like a mural, like on the wall. I think it's got like a few of the numbers in it.
Okay, yeah. I think that the main thing that he discovers that we hadn't seen before is the big computer room with the big. It's almost like dome-like inside. Like we'd seen glances of bits of the computer equipment, but he's the one who sort of goes in, and there's this big.
Yeah, and I think there's a moment where he's wandering around where like you see the key around his neck kind of get pulled up by a magnetic force, I think.
Didn't notice that one, but yeah, okay, that's a useful bit piece. And then you get the reveal of Locke being held at gunpoint, and then Desmond appearing, and you've got a few. Yeah, immediately you've got a few questions. Yeah, that's what sparks them. Well, how the hell did Desmond get here? And then where's Kate? Because you've got Locke held at gunpoint, but where's Kate? How on earth is this guy there? All sorts of questions. And then the episode ends. Cliffhanger. Boom.
Welcome to season 2.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think as a beginning episode of a season, I think it was very well suited to its task. I think I mentioned at the beginning, it has a very simple structure. It addresses some of the things, like, you've been waiting for a whole season pretty much to want to see what the inside of this hatch is like. I think it supported to some extent some of my sort of ideas about what kind of thing it was, but at the same time added like a whole load of extra. Okay,
like what?
Yeah, I think that the biggest thing that it did is that I had this idea of it, being a fallout shelter and so on, but I wasn't really sure against what. But now that you've got the timings of things, it does seem like it's like a shelter against some kind of sickness, virus, whatever it was, COVID-5 that hit the island.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it definitely advanced the mysteries while keeping it simple. And if you're coming back to it from 6 months, it wasn't throwing too much at you at that point in time. So
yes, yeah, I mean, yeah, it's the mentioned it before. It's the kind of classic Lost maneuver of it gives you some answer as to like the big thing that you were asking.
Yeah,
but that's not really kind of cleared anything up.
No.
And that, like, this is what's in the hatch. It's a whole new bunch of weird stuff.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I think, and the only other thing I was going to mention, it's the first time we have open discussion of the smoke monster.
Oh yes, yeah, okay.
It's the first time we have two characters actually talking about it and actually acknowledging like this smoke monster thing is real. It exists. It's weird.
Yeah. Because it was when Locke's talking. Was Locke talking to Kate?
It's Locke talking to Kate, and yeah, they have a little bit of. It's one of those. What are you doing, Locke? Things are mad, and Locke's like, I know they're mad. Did you not see me get dragged down a hole by a cloud of smoke?
Yeah.
And I don't think Kate even kind of answers like verbally. She's just kind of like nods her head or whatever. Yeah. That was weird.
Yeah. What did you see, Kate? I think was the line or something along those lines, and she's just sort of forced to. Yeah, that was weird.
But yeah, it's the first time after a whole season, basically, that we've had two characters openly kind of talking about this thing now that they've seen it. And yeah, like we've talked before, we assume that Locke at least has seen it at least once before he got attacked by it. But yeah, that was episode 1 of season 2. Join us next time. We get some interesting storytelling techniques where we see the other side of Jack's discoveries.
Yep.
And your heart breaks for Michael.
Maybe.